Really cool that you're here. Welcome to this in-depth online talk with Roger Arevalo, which is called The Management's Consultant's Guide to Seizing the Means of Production. A short description. When Marx and Engels said capitalism creates its own gravediggers, they probably weren't thinking of the most innovative capitalist managers. But in one of the great ironies of history, they accidentally created a group of methods that perfectly fit both how to seize the means of production and what to do with them once we have. The best from high risk industries, services, manufacturing, and mega projects, crew resource management, the Vanguard Method, the Toyota production system, the theory of constraints, and critical chain management. These show us the way. Roger Arevalo, I'm sorry for butchering your name, sorry. Roger Arevalo is going to tell us how they support democracy and mass participation, deny the bullies and democrats anywhere to dig in and fester, and show how a demand-driven economy not only solves but dissolves most of the problems of economic planning. Roger, I'm excited. Let me just say one tiny thing. As a prelude also, um, we talked a bit internally in our events team also about our discourse on democratic economic planning and that it can sometimes be very self-referential and quite insular, and that there are a lot of potential connections to other fields where the connections for most of us might not be as obvious or not as known, but that we are simply missing out on. And I think Roger's talk here will be like a good kind of like start for moving away from this, and that we actively start building those bridges or explore possible connections to fields that aren't classically super related to the core DEP discourse. And so I'm very happy to have Roger here. Roger, take it away.
Thanks. Okay, just to start off with a mm, bit of fun topical stuff. In the preparation, getting ready for this, I was rereading W. Edwards Deming's book, Out of the Crisis. Absolute classic. But listen to this for something a bit topical. Dependence on protection by tariffs and laws to buy American only encourages incompetence. So a bit of a topical commentary, first written in 1982, to get started with that. And okay, so if you're going to something to one of my events, I'm guessing you want to hear me talking smack about something, because that's just kind of my brand now. So let's get this going with such a big part of the democratic planning world is the labor hours, labor time accounting. And just to say, firstly, we know that there are problems with this, that not only is mainly being that it punishes anybody who attempts to figure out how to make a job quicker and easier. Yeah, you can go home earlier to your empty house because you couldn't afford to put anything in it. But my hot take on this now is that labor time accounting is actually a trauma response to capitalism. That people have been so brutalized by being ripped off and exploited that it's kind of taken over their sense of what the future is. It's become all about preventing that. So even though the sort of one of the big like alienating, soul destroying things about capitalism is having to clock on. Somehow now, labor time accounting wants everybody to clock on, and this sort of illustrates one of the underlying problems, that we've kind of become obsessed with just this short range view of undoing the bad things that and that has kind of clouded the vision of what this whole thing is really supposed to be about. And to just give you an alternative, this is like the big kind of mystical vision of revolution that actually comes from, it has sort of precedent in sort of Bolshevik, I guess you could almost call it mythology, like techno occultism kind of stuff and cosmism. But this is actually a dream I had once to put this in a different kind of context. And in this dream, it was like it was just after successful insurrection, and the streets are still packed with crowds of people just sort of milling around in a sort of state of, oh my God, did we just do that? Did we just win? And then inside the sort of control room, the equivalent of the Smolny Institute in this dream, which was more like a NASA mission control. There's like everybody in this room, like a mass meeting, sort of going back in one direction, but all massive screens on the other end of the wall, and people like controllers at various radio stations and stuff. And one of them is just talking to the on the radio, and then turns round to address the crowd to pass on some important piece of information, and speaks in a language nobody has ever heard before. And everybody in the room goes silent as they just realized they understood it. They'd never heard those words before, never heard this language before. It never existed before, but they knew what it meant. And somehow it conveyed something that no language they'd ever heard before meant. And then suddenly they realize they can speak it too. And the room just gets louder and louder as everybody talks back and forth to each other in this new language. And they're amazed that they can speak it, understand it, and it conveys a whole new meaning that they never understood before. And then the controller at the front, who first started this off, holds up the radio, like with a look on his face, like, shall I do it? And everybody's like, yeah, do it. And he talks on the radio in the new language. And then you see out in the street, like all the people around, like just sort of hanging around big diggers with wrecked police cars on their buckets and whatever, all the digger revolution and all the other exciting stuff that just happened out in the street. And a radio crackles into life. And somebody like sat on one of these big JCBs and just gets the same confused look momentarily as the same realization happens in their mind. And then they say, like, repeat, please, hold it up and to the crowd. And the voice crackles in again, these new words. And the same thing happens again. This ripple just passes through this entire mass of people who realize not only have they overthrown the established order, but they've somehow this new language has just come into being, this new language that's worthy of the sort of new thoughts, new life that's become possible. And okay, that is the revolutionary dream I had. And although I can't promise you a new language will suddenly come into being, this is sort of the sort of vision we need to be ready with. The sort of radical change we're thinking about may happen. This has to be so much more capable of so much more than just new sort of bookkeeping and a new wages system and any of the other little details, But also, since I can't promise the new language, and to bring it back to the level that we can expect it to happen, things to happen at. I imagine just just in the immediate aftermath of the revolution, some workplace has just taken the boss out in a wheelbarrow and dumped him in the canal. And now it's time to go back into the building, take it over. And now it is time we've seized the means of production, and it's time to rebuild the world as we see fit using them. And now there's obviously a kind of a big jump between just regular service, that what we need to get going, and the more ambitious plans. But fortunately, we've got, as I'll now present, the means to do pretty much all of it. And it's one thing I may be doing this a bit out of order to what I normally would do, because I've already done stuff on I've done other videos on Vanguard Method, and both me and other people have done Toyota production system. So I'm going to at least start on some of the other bits and pieces, some of the other methods, just to make sure I've got them done and they don't stay undone. And I think just to imagine this workplace. It's a good idea when you're thinking about this stuff to imagine a different kind of industry to what normally is in the sort of economic planning imagination, which is kind of like almost sort of guild socialism of these extremely flexible workshops, like multi-role businesses that could theoretically do a lot of different things. And it's like it taps into the workers' right to make what they want, distribute it as they see fit. And there are some multi-purpose machine shops there that are like that. But a lot of industry isn't. It's a lot more specialized. And, so it may help to think of it as being a place that installs, maintains, and repairs equipment, or stuff is brought into them to repair, because that creates a sort of more realistic kind of bounded sense of the possible. It doesn't necessarily matter exactly what they install and stuff. Like, it could be garage doors, it could be mainframe computers, or it could be in that same kind of restricted thing. You do air traffic control. Your choice is, do the planes land on runway 23 left or 23 right? Or you work in a water treatment plant. You have two jobs: safe drinking water and get rid of the sewage safely. But and also, like, to imagine this, you go back into the workplace, first thing to do, and one of the things that the planning discourse seems to lack confidence in is this kind of overwhelm at this point, like this sense of how will you know what to do? How will anybody know what to produce? And it's like, my dudes, you have customers, you have suppliers, pick up the phone. It's not that complicated, at least at this basic level. But so to get into methods, we'll start with crew resource management, which comes from, it's kind of got it's got a split family tree. It comes from both the airlines and the American nuclear industry. And it's spread out into like emergency services, hospitals, various other high-risk environments where mistakes have really, really bad consequences. But it transfers over really well between things. And the main difference between them is just how kind of chaotic and unpredictable an environment you're in, with sort of aircraft cockpit at one end of the more predictable, and sort of sinking ship, burning building, battlefield at the other end, and with sort of hospital operating room in the middle. But the basic principles all work pretty well with just slight modifications. And since we have an interest in all levels of chaos, depending on what we're doing, it's significant. And one of the main things of crew resource management is to get the most out of every person who's there, who's involved. And a really big part of how that is done is the authority figure, even though there is one, like there is a leader who is in charge, who is like the most experienced and so on. They make sure they get as much like information and opinions and ideas as possible about all their subordinates. And a few classic examples of this. One is American firefighters on this fire ground, burning building, and there's a very, very senior fire chief there. They're talking about what they're going to do, looking at this building. But there's also just starting probationary firefighter. This is the first real fire he's ever been to. And the fire chief deliberately turns to this new guy and asks him what he thinks and if he's got anything to contribute. And he just looks at the burning building and says, "Why is the roof rippling like that?" And the fire chief just looks back at it and then looks to everybody else and says, "Okay, change of plan, we're not going in." And that kind of illustrates how even the new guy there, who doesn't even know what he's looking at, still saw something significant that really, really needed to be passed on, and that the more experienced people knew what to do with. And this particularly relates to us as kind of like the healthy expression of like leadership and experience. That even though there is a leader, there is an expert, you need to get as much information out of everybody as possible, get their input to get the best possible outcome. And say another example is if you've heard the Miracle on the Hudson, where the plane flying out of New York hit Canada Geese, double engine failure. And if you listen to the cockpit voice recorder, Sully, the captain, says, "I have control." And the co-pilot replies, "You have control." And just this tone of voice is so clearly implied, damn right, you have control. I don't want to have to deal with this. And then that let Sully take over and fly the plane as the most experienced pilot. And the co-pilot could go through the checklist trying to relight the engines, which he didn't succeed at, but they did successfully land on the Hudson and everybody survived. Or just to give you one more example, refueling plane in Operation Desert Storm hit wake turbulence and nearly got ripped apart. It like lost 2 engines, massive flight control damage. And as they're coming back to base, they're talking among themselves about like how to sort of land this thing safely. And one of the people in the back, one of the engineer maybe, or one of the other crew, realizes that their hydraulic system's so damaged, they only have the chance to put the brakes on once, and then there's no pressure left. And this plane has anti-lock braking. It'll try and pump the brakes. So it'll just, it'll go on once, then it'll come off, no more brakes anymore. So he suggests pulling the circuit breaker out of the anti-lock braking system so that the brakes will just go on once, lock if they have to, who cares? We'll be able to stop safely. We'll tear up the runway, but who cares? And if you watch the episode of Air Crash Investigations on this, they all just sort of look at each other, the pilot, the co-pilot, the engineer, the boom operator, and the look just goes between them. Are we sure we want to do this? We may not get a second chance. And they all just sort of nod, and the guy pulls the circuit breaker. The brakes work, they land safely. Everything's okay. And that's sort of these sort of high-risk situations are the sort of things revolutionaries are going to have to deal with all the time, both like in the run-up to the revolution, during it, and when we've taken over afterwards. We're going to have a lot of dangerous industries to run. So this is one part of what we need to be able to do. And another thing that comes on from CRM and human factors and related kind of topics is extremely realistic training is like one of the cornerstones of doing the preparing for these kind of things. And there's an interesting story about this. Like you need the train to be realistic in one sense, that like everything has to be right. You know, like if you press this button, it has to be exactly where this button will be in real life, kind of thing. Everything has to be laid out right. So you can get your like all your hand-eye coordination down just right. But a lot of people psychologically they don't want to commit to realistic training. It's like it messes with the head, and they want to come up with excuses why this couldn't happen here. You know, this couldn't happen because of this. We'd never let that happen. And all these excuses. So in the emergency services, one of the popular ones they've come up with is the zombie apocalypse scenario. And if you train on the zombie apocalypse scenario, people who before was just coming up with all these excuses why these scenarios, no matter how realistic, no matter how close to reality, and they may have been based on things that actually happened, couldn't happen. As soon as the zombie apocalypse happens, they commit to it. They're enthusiastic. And after probably making excuses about, oh, we don't need this, all our equipment's fine, they'll be like changing their tune to like, oh, we need to totally change how our radios work. We need better stuff on the vans. We need an extra layer in the command structure. This is a mess. And the more realistic one, but similar to get over psychological resistance in, say, a chemical plant. If the people in the plant are just saying, no, this plant will not catch fire, it will not explode, this will never, ever happen. One way you can run the simulation is just to have a helicopter crash into the plant, because now it's on fire and it's nobody's fault, but they still have to deal with it. So that's another trick. And you know, on the left, we could really do with people who have enough experience of like you know, the high risk strike, you know, high risk stuff, the strike, riot, police repression, coup d'etat. If we could get somebody who has actually been through a coup d'etat and could talk us through like the sequence of what you need to do to stop one, and we could practice it as on like as a map exercise, or if we could get some sort of computer simulator, that would be freaking amazing. And that takes me to the next point smoothly. On the subject of training, pretty obviously after a revolution, we take over. There is so much stuff that is going to need doing. We're going to have like one of the most massive skills shortages and labor shortages in history. We're going to have to train up a phenomenal amount of people in all sorts of different jobs. But fortunately, we've already got a system for doing that. It's got a complex family tree that started off with Charles Allen in the shipyards of World War One, and he wrote a book about it called "The Instructor, the Man, and the Job." That became training within industry in World War II, which was mainly in America, but some places like the British Army Catering Corps were trained on these sort of
Roger?
methods. Yeah.
Roger, the books that you mentioned and the concepts that you mentioned, can you maybe like post them in the chat so we like can copy and paste them for ourselves and look them up later? I don't want to
Uh,
break your flow, but it's just like, you know, that, yeah, like especially the book titles and the author title would be super helpful. Like the one you just mentioned, for example. Okay, thank you.
um, and then the people who knew the training within this industry people actually after the war went to Japan and it became very popular at Toyota, and a modified version of it was their system. Uh, and this again, it's in some parts of it are very technical. It's to do with like the human learning process, and it's to do with like really understanding the job down to a very technical level and breaking it down into very small chunks and making sure you go through them multiple times in detail with all the explanations, um, so that the person really understands it, and then having the student do it multiple times to get them to do it. So not only is it very effective, but again, it also fits us ideologically because of the necessary to create a positive training environment. You have to treat the students with respect, make them feel comfortable, make them feel at ease, and reassure them you want them to succeed, and how important this skill is to do right for like the safety of the other people in the plant and the final user. And actually, if you look up training within industry on YouTube, there's a great like sort of wartime information film of this woman factory worker being instructed how to make this aircraft part. That really does a good job of showing the wrong way and the right way to do it. And also, it's good as well because after you've seen the instruction technique, if you watch all the stages of the actual process, it's a good exercise to see how many ways you could improve the process itself. And like you start thinking about stuff, if you could put those boxes there and those boxes over there, it would be a smoother flow. And if you could put a jig on the drill press, so you wouldn't have to position each one exactly. And if you could have like an oil bottle that automatically dripped onto the drill, you wouldn't have to brush oil onto it every time. You know, it's just the sort of thing you can think through, like all the options for improvement. Okay, just check my book. Oh yeah, get my notes here. I got a couple of pages. Oh yeah, another interesting thing that is the human factors thing is control room design, which will be very popular with people who are into cybernetics. Although I stand my ground on this, that although some of the descriptions sound very similar, you're better off studying the real world stuff than the abstractions a viable system model. I will stick by that. And interesting, just a kind of a side here about control rooms. There's various designs. Like there's some where everybody faces forwards, like NASA mission control. There's ones where everybody faces inwards, which is Project Cybersyn. You know, that has the facing one. There's some old power station designs where everybody faces outwards. There's the well, I went on the tour of Drax Power Station, and they have like pods of little groups of people facing inwards around but in their little group, and several pods around the outside edge, and then like a conference table and a big set of screens in the middle, which is interesting. And the newest design, which comes from nuclear submarines, is to have back-to-back monitors, which is a thing where the commander wants to be able to both see the faces of the people in the control room with him, but also wants to be able to see what they can see on their monitor. And normally it was either one or the other. He's like looking over their shoulder at the monitors and can't see them properly, or is in front of them and can see the faces but can't see the monitors. So the combined solution is to have him at the front, them facing him, and have so he can make eye contact, and then to have a back-to-back monitor in front of him so he can see both their face and what they're seeing. But that is kind of really nice stuff for us to be thinking about when the control room in the revolution is probably going to be like 12 people in a bus stop shouting into radios. So, check my book. Okay, next bit.
Maybe
Oh
if I
yeah,
can, yeah,
yeah.
what would be interesting if you could touch on push and pull production, And I know that you mentioned it a couple of times. I know Tom and Donald talk about this. I know it's a thing of the Toyota production system, and it has been like a frequent point of like critique that like the usual planning models are basically push production. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I've been gonna. That's the next thing partially on my list anyway. Mm. And this is the theory of constraints. And this was first introduced into the world in 1984 in a novel, like a discursive novel called The Goal, which was written by Eliyahu Goldratt as a way of illustrating this theory. Mm. And is not a good novel, but it is, and it has set off a tradition of also not good business novels, all trying to illustrate the theory of constraint. Like, but they're not good literature, but they do explain the system. So you do need to read at least some of them. The one that is good that I enjoyed just to read was the Phoenix Project, which is about theory of constraint in IT. Which, if you know some other theory, if you know Vanguard Method as well, and a few other things, it does have some howlers in it, some real bad mistakes, but it's still really good, really interesting book. Okay, so theory of constraints is the theory that pretty much any production process will have a bottleneck in it somewhere. You might be able to get away with this if you like Toyota and you've just decided that this entire production line is just going to build Toyota Aigos and nothing else. And then you can just sort of design it out so that each step in the production line takes about a minute. You've got a 1 minute tack time, everything flows smoothly. You can have minimal inventory. That's nice enough. But if you've got like a complex production line, not even a production line, like a multifunction machine shop, or something else like, say, a chemical production area, which can become so complicated. They call it the dance floor because the path, everything takes. Every different product takes a different path and it's different times. It's so complex. It looks like one of those dance diagrams with like footprints to show where you go. And so what the solution to this is you analyze your whole production system and you find where the bottleneck is. And the bottleneck can be a lot of things in different situations. It can be a machine. It's commonly a machine. Actually, if you've got heat treatment ovens, it's probably the heat treatment ovens. That's so cliche. It's pretty much a joke. But it can be a machine. It can be a person with a specialist skill set. It can be floor space. In one case, in a luxury hotel, the bottleneck was the capacity of the service elevator. And there's some really good stuff. If you look up Maris Consulting YouTube, their YouTube, and also Tokaico. They've got some great different case studies and stuff, all sorts of other stuff. Like, one place was doing F-16 maintenance and like repair and overhaul and stuff. And their ultimate bottleneck was they didn't have enough qualified aircraft sheet metal workers, welders and stuff. So they had to go after they smoothed everything out as best they could. They had to hire loads more. But yeah, you find your bottleneck, which can be any number of these things. And once you've found them, Maris Consulting and Tokaico are two separate things. I should have put an and in there. And there's various ways to do it. Sometimes you can just walk around the place and whatever has a bunch of stuff piled up in front of it, that's the bottleneck. Other times you have to like ask people, if you need something that hasn't arrived, where do you have to go and get it? That's another way of doing it. And then there's this 4-stage process to how to deal with the bottleneck. And it has like a shortcut in it. And once you've found the bottleneck, the first thing you do with it is just the sort of quick and dirty solution. And it's just like looking at this, is there anything obvious we can do to make it work better? And so often there is. It may be just like reorientate the machine, have a better way of loading stuff into the machine. Um, or, but like I said, there's loads of these sort of examples, but it just becomes, it may be obvious with a quick and dirty solution. And if you do that, what can happen then is the bottleneck moves. You've got another choke point. And then you go there, another quick and dirty solution. And this can go on for a while. You can chase the bottleneck around for a while until you hit a point where we've improved this as much as we reasonably can quickly. It's kind of stuck. We can't get this much better than it currently is, at least not without a massive investment, like buying another huge machine or something. And then at that point, what you have to do is subordinate everything else in the plan to this one bottleneck. Because although you can, they will say, the purists will say that any improvement anywhere else is just wasted. That's not true. Other places you can still improve quality, you can improve safety, and you can even make them more efficient, because that may free up people to come and help with the serious bottleneck. But moving on from that, when you do have this currently immovable bottleneck, you have to subordinate everything else in the plant to it. So nothing else comes through that doesn't faster than the bottleneck can handle it. And you have to keep the bottleneck running all the time, because any time lost on the bottleneck, it's gone forever. There's no way to catch up anywhere else. So you can never shut it down. You have to have people on it all the time. And if that means staggered tea breaks, that's what you do. A usual thing to do is have a stack of inventory in front of it, so it'll never starve. It can always keep going. And that is the different bit from a pure Toyota production system. They don't like having inventory. Theory of constraint, you need inventory in front of the bottleneck and maybe a couple of other places. And this is where pull comes in, because Toyota production system and theory of constraint have their own versions of this, and there's some others as well. Like TPS has Kanban, which is where you have basically a feedback system that where each part of the production process can pull the next thing through. And it's an example of it is like the two bin system, where you've got, so you need two bins of parts that you're using, start off both full. You work one down to empty, and then when that one's empty, you send it back to be refilled, and then you work down the second one while the next one is coming back, and it flows back and forth. And the way it often works is the arrival of the empty container is just telling the upstream process it's time to fill this. And there's all sorts of other ways to do it. You can do it with flashing lights. You can do it with an automatic email. There's a lot of ways to people have set up to do it. And in the theory of constraints version, it's called drum buffer row, where the constraint beats out like a drum beat. And what they consider the sort of metaphorical rope goes back upstream and pulls things into the system at the rate the bottleneck can handle. So even though you may have an order in for something, whether this is like a manufacturing thing or a project to design something, it doesn't actually start working its way through the system until the bottleneck can handle it. And a drum buffer rope, there's the buffer. And you keep track of how the buffer's doing, like how much there is of it. And as it's going down, that may tell you there's something wrong that needs attention. Let's look at my book here.
Super quickly, I think you now got into like you kind of like exemplified pull production really well. But can you make the contrast between like this is pull, this is push production, and that's the problem of push production? Can you make that a little bit more like really clear, and how push production is kind of like the normal modus operandi for the most planning models.
Yeah. And this is the problem because of the multiple problems that push creates is it's based on a guess. You can't know like what is going to happen, how much demand there is going to be for things. So you just then we end up just making to stock, and then inventory just starts piling up everywhere. And this causes all sorts of problems. Like mm, mm, there's just like the cost of it, the space it takes up. If it's got a shelf life, it can deteriorate. Um, it can outdate. Um, it just creates like no end of nightmares. Like both, you can also be like stacked to the ceiling, but not have the thing the customer actually needed. Uh, it just it really clogs the system. It chokes it all up. And it's pointless because it has so little connection to where you know the reality of what is going on, and what demand actually is. Which actually brings me fairly neatly to another bit that what they have is critical chain project management, which is when you once you sort of absorb the theory of constraint, this way of doing things, this is a way of managing long-term projects that, or short-term, that works for any, that to and this also helps with a lot of the problems that you to do with planned economy stuff. And so the basic stuff of critical chain is rather than in a normal project, every little bit would have its own safety buffer built in. What you do is you take all them out, you collapse all the actual stuff that needs doing into the sort of the idealized, this is the best, if everything goes perfectly, this is how long it will take. And then you put onto the end of that like sort of 30 to 50% extra buffer to absorb it. So that you've essentially collectivized the risk and the delays and everything that could potentially go wrong, but removed all the wasted stuff inside it that time that once spent would never get back. And they call it stuff like the student syndrome and whatever that law is that work expands to fill the space available. It gets rid of that, but still keeps your safety buffer. And
Roger,
the exact thing.
short notification that like we are now at the 40 minutes mark. If you can wrap it up in the next 10, that would be good.
Yeah, okay, so
Okay.
I guess I'm gonna have to come back for another one because I'm only about 2/3 of the way through.
If if we're doing 50, yeah, okay, okay.
Yeah, okay, so this is the significant bit. The yeah, the critical chain itself is the bit that comes the longest series of the dependent things that have to happen in a row. That's the critical chain because it's also the bottleneck. That is where it can go wrong. So that's the bit you have to protect. And like some other feeder things may have to have their own little buffers in as well. And they have this thing called the fever chart, which looks sort of like the flag of a very cheerful country. Like it's diagonal bits divided into red, amber, green, and you just mark projects on it, like completion versus buffer absorption. And it's one of the things that, okay, I'm going to dunk on Percon a bit here now. One of the things that I've heard them say is that if your plan is wrong, you'll know by the next yearly planning cycle. No, you'll know the next morning when the site manager is on the phone telling you the ready mix hasn't arrived. And what the fever chart does is it gives you that instant feedback, like either daily or next shift, that something is going wrong. Um, so, okay, last bit into what this all leads to is the project alliance. This is a thing that exists in the. If they can make this work in the cutthroat world of construction, we should be able to make workers' councils do it. And what this is, when you get a bunch of the client gets a bunch of contractors together, and instead of trying to screw each other over on the contract, they all write this out as a contract so that it benefits everybody. So there's no like cost plus where you're rewarded for bloating out the project, but punished if you figure out a way to do it quicker and easier. There's a lot of complexity in how this is done, like to do with contract law and stuff. But the thing is that this is a really easy thing to port over onto planning capex projects for workers' councils. And it can just be a really easy thing to do. Like, and also another thing in the economic planning, there's a problem. There's so obviously inefficient, like the consumer and the producer councils, how they like putting in these proposals and just like throwing them back and forth to each other. Like, why aren't these people just in the same room? But the thing you can do is like just in the workers' council where you're planning this big, these big projects, you can decide, okay, we're reactivating the Liverpool to Castleton railway line. All right, we sure we're doing this? Show of hands. Yep, we're doing this. All right, civil engineering contractors. Who wants this job? And like few people can, say if they want to go. And then we can sit down and decide what very quickly we can realize this is the pull on the mega project. As we're planning these things and like more and more plans are being stacked up because everybody's in the same room, all the expertise is there. You don't need like the big computer or the massive statistical tables, although you can have them to tell you whether this is possible because everybody's there in the big meeting room and with all the expertise. Your simple feedback loop is when your projects you're saying you want done is getting too ambitious, is when the representative from the steel syndicate starts visibly sweating. This doesn't need to be some like just massive figures and tables trying to figure out if this is doable or not. If we have the right people in the room, the expertise, the years of experience, they can just know to an extremely accurate level whether what everybody is asking for is doable or not. And then we can just make the decision that, okay, this is doable, let's do it. Or this is asking too much. Before we do it, we're either going to have to expand capacity or space things out so the bottlenecks never double booked. And then we can just stagger the start so everything can get done. And okay, I think that sums up. I only got through a fraction of what I had here, what I could have talked about, and a lot of stuff we didn't get to at all. But that is a lot of stuff that I've never talked about before. So it's I've got that out of my system at least. And I think that kind of illustrates one aspect of how these particular methods work, both in sort of immediate practicality in organizations as a whole, and for revolutionaries, and sort of how all these methods like the pull system and so on can scale up even to the highest levels of the workers' councils doing all the mega projects, which, if we're honest, a lot of us probably got into this because we want the mega projects so bad.
Okay. Um, I would say then we're going to go into the Q&A and discussion, and we can pick your mind on some stuff. Let's end the recording then.